We have the opportunity here to now hear from our platinum sponsor. If he could make his way to the front of the room to talk a little bit more about the Things platform. Over to you, Marco.
Folks, good morning. My name is Marco. I'm the CTO at a company called Things Canary. We're the main sponsor here at PyCon ZA 2024. Excuse me, 2024. The applause is cheap. I like it. Thank you. Keep it up. So this is a really short session. I'm not going to use actually this time to talk about what we do. You have browsers, you have phones. We have a booth outside. We're doing product demos. If you want to know more about us, you don't actually need to hear me talk about it. The short version is we're a cybersecurity company. We make a product. It's this thing, the Things Canary. It's a honeypot. It's deployed on all 7 continents. Instead, what I want to do is talk about community and contributions. And actually this sort of carries on a little bit with what Robson was talking about. I only have 10 minutes. It's going to be a bit of a whirlwind. Firstly, let's get to the obvious contributions. PyCon couldn't be put on without an organizing team. This is the team. For some of them, trying to grab profile pics turned out to be tougher than expected. So I'm sorry if that's not your favorite profile pic. But Adam, Adriana, James, Kim, Laura, Neil, Sheena, Simon, and Stefan all poured lots of time and effort into making this event possible and at a price that I think is incredibly reasonable. So I just want to pause here and just say thank you to the organizing team for putting this on. Some of these folks have been running PyCon right from the very first PyCon ZA. So they've really put time in since 2012. And in particular, I want to call out Dr. Neil Muller because he has for a long time run or organized the Cape Town Python user group, trying to get those monthly meetings going. And post-COVID, he really struggled to get speakers. And then eventually the group wound up. He really put in a valiant effort, but Neil did more than his fair share of talks trying to keep that monthly meeting going. So Neil, thank you for that. Secondly, I want to thank Robson for his passionate promotion of open source in the educational realm. You know, for almost 4 decades, open source has been nurtured by, and I think in turn supported, educational institutions. Hearing Robson speak and hearing some of the questions, I was reminded 20 years ago, I spoke in front of a teachers' conference in Johannesburg and argued quite vociferously for open source in schools. And I was heckled by a Microsoft representative at the time about license interpretations and that sort of stuff. I was young and it was a thing, but it's kind of interesting to me to note the difference, certainly in the posture of Microsoft today. I'm not sure exactly who raised the question, but that comment around Microsoft and it being a little bit muddy is accurate. They are a massive promoter of open source these days, but they still make obviously huge amounts of money off it. And so for me, the question has often, or generally has been not so much should we support open source as much as whether the tools and products can find maintainers? And I think this is a question that also came up in the discussion session, and whether the users can find support, because software is not the end goal, right? Like that's not why people write the software. It's a means to an end. They're trying to solve some problem. And I think open source needs our support. So when I say open source, I'm not going to talk about personalities. I'm not talking about projects, and I'm not talking about licenses. Instead, what I simply want to do here is encourage more contributions. Because I think it's foolish to argue today about the impact of open source software. There's barely a niche that hasn't been touched by it. But in an increasingly SaaS world, where we access our products through browsers, or in a mobile world where we access them through our phones, that notion of open source really starts to become, I think, less meaningful for end users. Open source iPhone apps, rather, they're kind of they're virtually a contradiction in terms, and certainly GPL'd apps violate the App Store terms and conditions, for example. And if we look at SaaS, it doesn't really matter that your Mastodon is open source if the instance that you access Mastodon through is run by somebody else who can terminate it at any stage. So merely making it open source isn't going to be enough to ensure the success of the products. On the other hand, it is so prevalent, open source, is so prevalent through our software supply chains that I don't think you can find a product that has zero open source in its supply chain, either directly in the product or else somewhere in the tooling used to build it. So this is the acknowledgements PDF that ships with Apple's Xcode. It's like 228 pages of open source acknowledgements, right? And so anyone who builds an app for an iPhone or an Apple Watch or an Apple TV, even though those apps are not open source has gone into that software supply chain. So it infuses our ecosystems, and it's great. Like Python is the language we know and love, we hear. And it has several interpreters which are distributed under various open source licenses. That ethos extends beyond the software into the management and the running of the Python community. You can see it in the evidence of this conference, for example. The PSF also steers the Python community based on the principles of collaboration and engagement. So I'm not going to get too deep into who community members are. Certainly you all know developers, users, organizers, but I'm making a strong picture to say we can't forget about product vendors, all right? Product vendors are a part of open source communities. We're a product vendor, right? We're here. And the question that, or one of the comments earlier on license issues and what's happening with WordPress, it's certainly not the first one, and it won't be the last. There's also been other issues in recent years. HashiCorp, you may be aware, relicensed Terraform because they were concerned about folks taking Terraform and building products off it, but not contributing back. Elastic, quite famously, had their dispute with AWS. And the core of it is folks feeling that they're putting out open source, but not seeing contributions coming back. Now, when we talk about contributions, this part, I don't have to pitch this stuff: code, documentation, triaging bugs, organizing events, all of that stuff about. That's the sort of common things with open source. But for a healthy community to exist, we need robust support. And so I'm not going to dwell on these. I think, though, if you think about that typical idea, which says, hey, open source says you get to go and throw a pull request on some GitHub and you're contributing. That's true, you are. But a project cannot sustain itself based on drive-by pull requests, right? You can't wait for like a person to come past and maybe contribute towards the project. And instead, what we like to do is pay maintainers. It's pretty straightforward. Pay maintainers. Does anybody, and in fact, I will find a good prize for you, but does anyone know who this is? Anybody? The guy on the left. It's a bit of a, yeah. So this is Bob Ippolito, which may or may not trigger a thing for you. But Bob Ippolito for a long time was the single maintainer on Simple JSON, right? And so if you've used the Simple JSON package in a project at some point, you were relying on the fact that Bob Ippolito could afford a YubiKey so that his account at PyPI was not compromised, right? And if you can't afford that, all of the security of your software is under scrutiny, I guess. On the right-hand side, I've just got a reference there to the XZ compression utility. It was backdoored earlier this year because the maintainer there was basically strung out and accepted help from somebody who it turned out was not who they thought they were. And we came this close to a widespread backdoor in SSH across the internet. And so, for me, the takeaway is maintainers should spend more time with their code and get paid for it. And so, I think that us product vendors, and I do say us because I include ourselves here, who make money off open source, we should make sure that we pass it on to the projects that we use to ensure the longevity of those projects that we rely on. In my head, this is a pretty straightforward trade-off. Either we pay maintainers or we become maintainers. And you can call it kind of selfish, but at Thinkst, I'd rather we concentrated on building our product than on maintaining a library. So to be super clear, I think the onus is on companies to support open source projects. I don't think developers in their individual capacities have any obligation to support projects. I think, though, as I said, if you're a company making money on open source projects, you should probably be donating, either in the form of straight cash or hiring long-term maintainers. Now, that second option isn't workable for most companies. I don't expect most organizations to hire maintainers. But the first one is. you can go right now to the donate button on your favorite projects, pass that link across to your finance people and say, pay them. Like, they help us, we should pay them. And if you don't have that authority, you should agitate your leadership saying, we're relying on these projects, and if they go under or a maintainer gives it up, we're going to be dealing with dormant projects, meaning no security fixes, no bug fixes, certainly no enhancements. So I'm not saying donate to every project you use. We use a bunch of them. Let's Encrypt, for example, we don't donate to. They have a huge amount of support. They're clearly doing pretty well. But the Python Twisted project, for example, is one that we support because we use it. We want them to keep going. And so we donate to them. And so my pitch here is basically find the stable of open source projects that are important to you and that your product relies on, and then simply start donating to them. So in summary, here's the bottom line. It's really straightforward. If you rely on the work of others, make it worth their while to continue the work that they're doing. Seems pretty simple. All right. That takes us to the end of this. As I said, we'll be outside. We are demoing our thing. If you want to see how we use Python, I'm happy to talk product, Python, and contributions for the next 2 days. I hope you enjoy PyCon 2024. Thank you very much.